A gunshot echoed through the dusty streets of San Pedro, Texas. But Hannah Fletcher barely flinched as she continued to wrap fresh bandages around Mrs. Willoughby's arthritic hands. After 3 years as the town's only nurse, Hannah had grown accustomed to the sporadic violence that plagued their small community in the summer of 1878. The sound, however, was much closer than the usual saloon brawls, and something about it sent a chill down her spine. "You should check that," Mrs. Willoughby said, her weathered face creasing with concern. "Sounded like it came from just outside." Hannah secured the bandage with a small pin and patted the older woman's hand. "You're probably right." She wiped her palms on her apron, the pristine white now smudged with the day's work. At 26, Hannah had seen more blood and suffering than most, her skills honed first in the aftermath of the war and later refined through necessity and determination. The bell above the clinic door jangled as Mrs. Willoughby departed, leaving Hannah alone with her thoughts and the lingering echo of the gunshot. Against her better judgment, she stepped onto the porch, shielding her eyes against the harsh Texas sun. The main street stretched before her, shimmering in the afternoon heat. That's when she saw him, a man sprawled face down in the dust about 50 yards from her clinic. His body was motionless, his dark coat caked with dirt and what looked alarmingly like blood. No one else seemed to be rushing to his aid. In fact, the few townspeople visible on the street were actively avoiding looking in his direction. Hannah gathered her skirts and ran toward him, her heart pounding against her ribs. As she drew closer, she could see he was dressed like a cowboy, worn leather boots, dusty denim, and a hat that had tumbled a few feet away from his outstretched hand. She knelt beside him, unmindful of the dirt staining her dress. With practiced hands, she gently rolled him onto his side to assess the damage. His face was streaked with blood and grime, but she could make out strong, handsome features beneath the mess, a square jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble, a straight nose, and closed eyes framed by dark lashes. "Sir, can you hear me?" Hannah pressed her fingers to his neck, relieved to find a pulse, though it was worryingly faint. She examined him quickly, finding a bullet wound in his left shoulder, bleeding steadily. The man's eyelids fluttered and he groaned. His lips, cracked and dry, parted slightly. "I'm done," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Hannah's jaw set with determination. "No, you're just down," she replied firmly, already tearing a strip from her petticoat to create a temporary bandage. "And I'm going to help you up." The stranger's eyes opened, then startlingly blue against his sun-bronzed skin, and for a moment they held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. Then they rolled back as he slipped into unconsciousness. Hannah looked up to see a small crowd had gathered, keeping a cautious distance. "I need help getting him to my clinic," she called out, but no one moved. Now, finally, the blacksmith's son and another young man stepped forward, reluctance clear in their movements. "Miss Fletcher, you don't know who that is," the blacksmith's son said, his voice low. "That's Owen Kincaid." Hannah frowned. "I don't care if he's the devil himself. He's bleeding to death. Now help me get him inside." The men exchanged glances but complied, lifting Owen's limp form and carrying him toward the clinic. Hannah hurried ahead to prepare her examination table, her mind racing. She'd heard whispers of Owen Kincaid, a notorious gunslinger with a reputation that stretched across 3 states. Some said he was a cold-blooded killer. Others claimed he was once a lawman gone rogue. What Hannah knew for certain was that he was now her patient, and she'd taken an oath to heal, not to judge. As they laid him on her table, she dismissed the men with a curt thank you and got to work, cutting away his blood-soaked shirt to reveal the wound, and a torso covered in old scars that told stories of a violent past. For hours, She worked meticulously, extracting the bullet, cleaning the wound, and stitching him up with the precision that had earned her respect even among the most skeptical townspeople. When she finally stepped back, her apron soaked with blood and sweat dampening her hairline, Owen Kincaid was still unconscious, but his breathing had steadied. Hannah moved a chair beside the table and sat down to monitor him, reaching for her journal to record the procedure. As she wrote, she couldn't help but study his face. Even in repose, there was something hard about his features, something that spoke of a life lived on the edge. Yet there was vulnerability there too, visible in the slight furrow of his brow and the downward turn of his mouth. "What brought you to San Pedro, Mr. Kincaid?" she murmured, knowing she would get no answer. "And who wanted you dead?" The evening stretched into night, and Hannah dozed fitfully in her chair, awakening at every small sound. It was nearing dawn when she jerked awake to find Owen's eyes open, watching her with wary intensity. "Where am I?" His voice was gruff, hoarse with pain and thirst. Hannah reached for a cup of water. "My clinic in San Pedro. You were shot in the street yesterday. Do you remember?" He accepted the water, wincing as he tried to sit up. "Vaguely. You the one who dug the bullet out," she nodded, helping him ease back down. "Hannah Fletcher. And yes, I am." "Owen Kincaid," he replied, though she already knew. "Though I reckon you've figured that out by now, given how folks around here seem to scatter like quail when I show up." Hannah busied herself checking his bandages. "Your reputation precedes you, Mr. Kincaid." A bitter smile curved his lips. "Usually does." "The wound was clean, went straight through the muscle. You're lucky it missed anything vital. You'll need to rest for at least a week, preferably 2. She stepped back, maintaining a professional distance. "Do you have somewhere to stay in town?" Owen's laugh was dry, humorless. "Not likely, madam. Most places around here would sooner shoot me than rent me a room." Hannah considered this. Her clinic had a small back room where she occasionally kept patients who needed monitoring. It wasn't ideal, but she couldn't very well turn him out in his condition. "You can stay here until you're well enough to travel," she decided. "But I have conditions." His eyebrows rose slightly. "I'm listening. No weapons in my clinic, no visitors, and you follow my medical instructions without argument." She fixed him with a stern gaze. "Break any of those rules and you'll find yourself healing in the stable." To her surprise, a genuine smile softened his features, transforming him momentarily into someone younger, less hardened. "Yes, madam, I believe I can manage that." Hannah nodded, ignoring the unexpected flutter in her stomach at his smile. "Good. Now who shot you, Mr. Kincaid? Should I be concerned about them returning to finish the job?" The smile vanished as quickly as it had appeared. "Just an old disagreement catching up with me." "And no, they won't be back." Something in his tone suggested the matter had been settled permanently. Hannah decided not to press further, at least not yet. "Very well. I need to see other patients today, but I'll check on you regularly. Try to rest." As she turned to leave, his voice stopped her. "Miss Fletcher," she looked back, meeting those intense blue eyes. "Thank you for saying I wasn't done." Hannah felt a strange tightness in her chest. "You're welcome, Mr. Kincaid. Now get some sleep." The next few days fell into an unexpected rhythm. Hannah would tend to her regular patients during the day, slipping into the back room between visits to check on Owen. At first, he slept most of the time, his body focusing its energy on healing. But as his strength returned, Hannah found him to be a surprisingly engaging patient, intelligent and observant, with a dry wit that often caught her off guard. By the 4th day, he was able to sit up and eat solid food. Hannah brought him a bowl of stew from the hotel restaurant across the street. "Real food," Owen said appreciatively, inhaling the aroma. "You're spoiling me, Miss Fletcher." Hannah rolled her eyes, setting a tray across his lap. "Hardly. You need protein to heal properly." She hesitated, then added, "And you can call me Hannah." He smiled that transformative smile again. "Only if you call me Owen." She nodded, busying herself with adjusting his bandages to hide the blush she could feel warming her cheeks. It was ridiculous, really. She was a medical professional, not some schoolgirl to be flustered by a handsome face. Even if that face belonged to a man whose very presence seemed to fill the small room. "How long have you been in San Pedro?" Owen asked, breaking into her thoughts. 3 years, she replied. "I came after the war. The town needed someone with medical training, and I needed." She trailed off, unsure how to explain what she had needed: a fresh start, a purpose, a place where she could be useful without the constant reminders of what she had lost. "A place where no one knew you," Owen finished for her, his eyes understanding. Hannah looked up, startled by his perception. "Yes, exactly," he nodded, taking a spoonful of stew. "I understand that better than most." A comfortable silence fell between them as Owen ate and Hannah checked his wound. The inflammation was subsiding nicely, the stitches holding well. "You're a good healer," Owen said, watching her work. "Better than most doctors I've encountered." Hannah's lips twitched. "That's because most doctors are too proud to learn from battlefield medicine. I had no such luxury during the war." "You were a nurse?" "Yes, from 63 to 65. She didn't elaborate, and he didn't press, which she appreciated. Those years had left scars that still ached sometimes, memories of young men dying in droves despite her best efforts. "I was a Union scout," Owen offered after a moment. "Spent most of my time behind Confederate lines, gathering intelligence." Hannah glanced up, surprised by the voluntary information. "That explains some of your older scars," he chuckled. "Observant. It's my job to be." She finished redressing the wound and stepped back. "You're healing well. Another week and you'll be fit to travel." Something flickered in his eyes, disappointment, perhaps, but he simply nodded. "Good to know." That night, Hannah found sleep elusive. She lay in her small bedroom adjacent to the clinic, listening to the occasional sounds from Owen's room, the creak of the bed as he shifted, a soft cough. Having him so close felt both comforting and unsettling. Comforting because, despite his reputation, she felt strangely safe in his presence. Unsettling because she was growing accustomed to that presence in a way that went beyond professional concern. The following morning brought unwelcome visitors. Hannah was checking Mrs. Peterson's newborn when Sheriff Davis burst into the clinic, 2 deputies behind him. "Where is he, Hannah?" the sheriff demanded, his hand resting on his holstered revolver. Hannah straightened, placing herself between the lawman and the door to the back room. "If you're referring to my patient, Sheriff, he's recovering from a gunshot wound and isn't to be disturbed." Davis's expression hardened. "That patient is wanted in 3 counties. I'm taking him in." "On what charges?" Hannah challenged. "Murder, for one. Got a telegram from the sheriff in El Paso this morning. Says Kincaid gunned down a man there last month." Hannah kept her voice steady, though her heart raced. "Be that as it may, he's under my care and too weak to be moved." "You can question him when he's recovered." The sheriff took a step closer. "This isn't negotiable, Hannah. Either you step aside or I'll move you aside." A quiet voice from behind her made them all freeze. "That won't be necessary." Hannah turned to see Owen standing in the doorway, leaning heavily against the frame. He was pale but composed, dressed in the clean clothes she'd procured for him. His eyes, however, were cold as they fixed on the sheriff. "Owen," she began, but he silenced her with a subtle shake of his head. "It's all right, Hannah," he said softly before addressing the sheriff. "Davis, been a while." The sheriff's jaw tightened. "Not long enough, Kincaid. You're under arrest." Owen didn't resist as one of the deputies approached with handcuffs. "The charges are false," he said, his eyes finding Hannah's. "I didn't kill anyone in El Paso." "Save it for the judge," Davis snapped, nodding to his deputies to take Owen. "The circuit court arrives next week." Hannah stepped forward. "He needs medical attention." "That wound could reopen if he's jostled." Davis hesitated, then relented slightly. "You can check on him at the jail. Once a day, supervised." As they led Owen out, he looked back at Hannah, his expression unreadable. But something passed between them, a silent acknowledgement that this wasn't over. The jail was a small, squat building on the edge of town, containing just 3 cells and the sheriff's office. When Hannah arrived that afternoon with her medical bag, she found Owen in the furthest cell, sitting on a narrow cot with his back against the wall. The deputy on duty gave her a nod and unlocked the cell door, though he remained watchful at the entrance. "How are you feeling?" Hannah asked, keeping her voice professional despite the anger simmering beneath. Owen's lips curved in a wry smile. "Been in worse places." She set down her bag and gestured for him to remove his shirt so she could examine the wound. As he did, she leaned in close, lowering her voice. "Did you do it? Kill that man in El Paso?" His eyes met hers, steady and clear. "No." Hannah searched his face, looking for any sign of deception. Finding none, she nodded once and began checking his stitches. "Then why does the sheriff there say you did?" Owen winced slightly as she probed the tender area. "Because someone wants me out of the way, and framing me for murder is cleaner than putting a bullet in me themselves." "Who?" He hesitated, then said quietly, "A man named Victor Caldwell. Wealthy rancher, respectable citizen on the surface. Underneath, he runs guns, steals cattle, and doesn't mind killing anyone who gets in his way." Hannah frowned, remembering the name from local gossip. "I've heard of him. His ranch is north of here. 3 years ago, I was hired to track down who was rustling cattle from small ranches in the area. Trail led to Caldwell. I gathered enough evidence to put him away, but before I could take it to the federal marshal, Caldwell's men ambushed me. I escaped, but barely." Owen's expression darkened. "Been running ever since, trying to stay ahead of his hired guns while gathering more evidence." "And you think he sent someone to kill you here in San Pedro?" Hannah asked, applying a fresh bandage to his shoulder. Owen nodded. "The shooter was one of his men. I recognized him before he pulled the trigger. Managed to fire back as I went down." His eyes held hers. "He won't be reporting back to Caldwell." Hannah absorbed this, her mind working rapidly. "So the charges in El Paso. Fabricated. Caldwell has men in law enforcement all over the territory. When bullets didn't work, he tried the law." Owen's hand caught hers as she finished with the bandage. "Hannah, I've done things I'm not proud of, but I'm not a murderer." She believed him. Whether it was intuition or something she'd seen in his eyes these past days, Hannah was certain Owen was telling the truth. "I'll help you," she said decisively, "but we need proof of Caldwell's deception." Owen's surprise was evident. "Why would you risk that? You don't know me." Hannah met his gaze steadily. "I know enough." For the next 3 days, Hannah split her time between her regular patients and gathering information. She visited Owen daily at the jail, ostensibly to check his wound but actually to exchange intelligence. Through careful conversations with townspeople and subtle questions to travelers passing through, she learned that Caldwell had indeed been in El Paso at the time of the murder, along with several of his men. On the 4th day, a breakthrough came in the form of a young cowhand named Tommy who'd worked briefly at Caldwell's ranch. Tommy had witnessed a conversation between Caldwell and the El Paso sheriff, where money had changed hands and Owen's name had been mentioned. He was scared but willing to testify if it meant stopping Caldwell. The circuit judge was due to arrive the next day. That night, Hannah waited until well after dark before making her way to the jail. The main street was deserted, most of the town tucked away in their homes or enjoying the saloon's offerings. A single lantern illuminated the jail's entrance. To her surprise, no deputy was on night duty. She found the front door unlocked and the sheriff's office empty. Uneasy, she moved toward the cells. Owen was awake, sitting alert on his cot. "Hannah," he said, a warning in his voice, "you shouldn't be here." "Something's wrong," she replied, searching for the cell keys usually kept on a hook near the desk. "Where's the guard?" Owen stood, gripping the bars. "Gone for about an hour now. Didn't say where he was going." Hannah found the keys and quickly unlocked his cell. "We need to leave, now." "What's happening?" "I don't know, but I don't like it. The circuit judge isn't due until tomorrow, but—" She handed him his boots, which had been placed outside the cell. Tommy, a former worker of Caldwell's, agreed to testify that he overheard Caldwell bribing the El Paso sheriff to frame you. But if Caldwell finds out— Understanding dawned in Owen's eyes. "We won't make it to the trial." Hannah nodded grimly. "Exactly." They moved silently through the sheriff's office and stepped outside. The night was unusually quiet, no piano music drifting from the saloon, no drunken laughter or calls from the street. "My clinic," Hannah whispered. "We can get supplies," and the crack of a rifle interrupted her, the bullet splintering the doorframe inches from Owen's head. He yanked her down behind a water trough as more shots rang out. "Caldwell's men," Owen muttered, scanning the rooftops across the street. "Must have paid off the sheriff to clear out." Hannah's heart pounded so loudly she was sure Owen could hear it. "What do we do?" Owen's expression was grim. "We need to reach your clinic. It's our best chance to get out of town." "There's a back alley," Hannah said, gesturing toward the narrow passage between buildings. "It runs behind the main street. We can use it to reach the clinic without being seen from the rooftops." Owen nodded. "On my signal, run for that alley. Don't stop no matter what. I'll be right behind you." Hannah swallowed hard. "Owen, go." He shoved her forward as he simultaneously rolled in the opposite direction, drawing the gunman's fire. Hannah ran, her skirts clutched in her fists, heart in her throat. Bullets kicked up dust at her heels as she dove into the alleyway's shadows. She pressed herself against the wall, gasping for breath, terrified that Owen hadn't made it. Seconds later, he appeared beside her, breathing hard but unharmed. "You all right?" she nodded, unable to speak. Owen took her hand, and they hurried through the darkness, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter behind them. The back door to Hannah's clinic was locked, but she kept a key hidden beneath a loose board on the step. Inside, they moved quickly, gathering supplies by the light of a single lamp. Hannah packed bandages, medicines, and food into a small bag while Owen located his gun belt, which she'd hidden in a cabinet. "We need horses," Owen said, buckling the belt around his waist, "and to get Tommy somewhere safe before Caldwell's men find him." Hannah tied the bag closed. "Tommy was staying at the livery stable. He's friends with the owner's son." "That's where we'll go then, but Hannah—" Owen caught her arm, turning her to face him. "You don't have to come with me. This isn't your fight." She looked up at him, surprised by the protectiveness in his expression. "I made it my fight the moment I pulled that bullet from your shoulder," she said firmly. "Besides, you still need medical attention." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Stubborn woman." "Practical nurse," she countered, shouldering her bag. "Now let's go before they figure out where we are." They slipped out the back door and into the alley again, moving cautiously toward the livery stable at the edge of town. The night had grown darker, clouds obscuring the moon and stars. As they approached the stable, Hannah felt a growing sense of dread. The doors stood open, a lantern still burning inside despite the late hour. Owen signaled for her to stay back while he crept forward, gun drawn. A moment later, he motioned for her to join him. Inside the stable, they found Tommy unconscious on the ground, a nasty gash on his forehead but still breathing. The stable boy was nowhere to be seen. Hannah knelt beside Tommy, examining his wound. "He's been hit hard, but I don't think it's too serious. We need to get him somewhere safe." Owen was already saddling 3 horses, his movements swift and efficient. "My cabin," he said. "About 15 miles north of here in the foothills. Caldwell's men won't know about it." They managed to get Tommy onto one of the horses, securing him with ropes to prevent him from falling. Owen helped Hannah mount the second horse before swinging into the saddle of the third. "Stay close," he instructed, leading them out the back of the stable and away from town. They rode through the night, pushing the horses as hard as they dared with their injured passenger. Hannah kept a watchful eye on Tommy, who drifted in and out of consciousness but seemed to be improving. Dawn was breaking by the time they reached Owen's cabin, a small, sturdy structure nestled among pine trees on a rocky hillside. "It's not much," Owen said as he helped Hannah down from her horse, "but it's defensible." The cabin was indeed simple, one room with a stone fireplace, a narrow bed, a table with 2 chairs and basic cooking implements. But it was clean and well maintained, with a small stack of firewood beside the hearth and shelves stocked with provisions. They settled Tommy on the bed, and Hannah cleaned and dressed his wound while Owen secured the horses and checked the perimeter. When he returned, she had a fire going and water heating for coffee. "He'll be fine," she reported, nodding toward Tommy. "The blow was meant to knock him out, not kill him, probably so they could question him later." Owen nodded, his expression grim. "They'll be looking for us. Caldwell won't give up easily." Hannah sank into one of the chairs, suddenly aware of her exhaustion. "What's our next move?" Owen poured her a cup of coffee and sat across from her. "Tommy is our key witness, but we need more evidence." "I've been collecting information on Caldwell for years, records of his illegal dealings, names of his associates, details of crimes he's ordered." He rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "Most of it is hidden about a day's ride from here. Once we have that evidence, we can take it to the federal marshal in Austin," Hannah suggested. "Bypass the local law entirely." Owen nodded slowly. "It could work, but it's dangerous, Hannah. The road to Austin takes us right past Caldwell's ranch." She met his gaze steadily. "I didn't come this far to turn back now." Something flickered in his eyes, respect, admiration, perhaps something more. "Then we leave at first light tomorrow. Tonight we rest and prepare." They spent the evening planning their route and tending to Tommy, who had regained consciousness and was now sitting up, eager to help despite his headache. Hannah checked Owen's wound, relieved to find it healing well despite their hasty escape and long ride. As night fell, they faced the sleeping arrangements. The cabin had only one bed, now occupied by Tommy. "I'll sleep by the fire," Owen insisted, spreading a blanket on the floor. Hannah was too tired to argue. She took the other blanket he offered and made herself as comfortable as possible in the chair, her feet propped on a wooden crate. Sleep came fitfully, her dreams filled with gunshots and shadowy pursuers. She woke several times, each time finding Owen awake, his eyes fixed on the door or window, gun within easy reach. The third time she stirred, the fire had burned low, casting the cabin in soft shadows. Owen sat with his back against the wall, knees drawn up, watching her. "You should sleep," she murmured. "I've gone longer without," he replied quietly. Hannah studied him in the dim light. "You've been running a long time, haven't you?" He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Too long. After a while, you forget what it's like to stay in one place, to build something that lasts." "Is that what you want, to build something?" Owen's gaze met hers, unexpectedly vulnerable. "I used to, before Caldwell, before everything. I had a piece of land picked out near the Colorado River. Good water, good grazing. Thought I'd raise horses there someday. Hannah could picture it Owen in the early morning light, moving among fine horses, building fences, a life far removed from the violence that had shaped him. You still could, she said softly, when this is over. A sad smile touched his lips. Perhaps. They fell silent, the only sounds the crackling embers and Tommy's soft snores. Hannah felt something shift between them in that quiet moment, a connection deeper than caregiver and patient, more complex than allies against a common enemy. Morning came too quickly, golden light spilling through the cabin's single window. They ate a simple breakfast of biscuits and dried fruit before preparing to depart. Tommy was well enough to ride but would remain at the cabin, armed with Owen's spare revolver and instructions to stay hidden. If we're not back in 3 days, Owen told him, make your way to Austin and ask for Marshal Clayton. Tell him everything you know about Caldwell. Tommy nodded solemnly, his young face determined beneath the bandage on his head. I will, you two be careful. They rode out as the sun cleared the eastern hills, heading northwest into rougher country. Owen led the way, his posture alert, eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. Hannah followed closely, her medical bag secure behind her saddle, a small revolver Owen had insisted she take tucked in her pocket. The day grew hot as they traveled, the landscape changing from pine forests to rocky outcroppings and sparse vegetation. They stopped briefly at midday to rest the horses and eat, sheltering in the shade of a large boulder. We're making good time, Owen said, studying the position of the sun. Should reach the hideout by nightfall if we keep this pace. Hannah took a sip from her canteen, watching him. There was an ease to his movements in this wild country, a confidence that came from years of self-reliance. Where is this evidence hidden exactly? An old Apache burial cave, Owen replied. Not many people know about it. I found it years ago, tracking a mountain lion that had been taking calves from a ranch near here. The Apache don't use it anymore, moved their burial grounds further west after settlers started pushing in. It's safe, dry, and the kind of place most white men would avoid out of superstition. Hannah raised an eyebrow. But not you. A faint smile crossed his lips. I've learned that living men are far more dangerous than dead ones, no matter what stories people tell. They continued their journey, the terrain growing more challenging as they followed a narrow trail up into the hills. By late afternoon, dark clouds had gathered on the horizon, and the air took on the heavy stillness that precedes a storm. We need to push harder, Owen called back to her. That storm looks bad and we're still a few hours out. They urged their horses to a faster pace, but the storm moved more quickly than anticipated. Within an hour, the sky had darkened dramatically, and the first fat raindrops began to fall. Soon they were riding through a deluge, lightning splitting the sky and thunder rolling through the canyons. There's a line shack about half a mile ahead, Owen shouted over the storm. We'll shelter there until it passes. The shack was little more than 4 walls and a roof, abandoned by whatever ranch had once used it as an outpost. But it was dry inside, and there was even a small wood stove with a few logs stacked beside it. Owen lit the stove while Hannah tended to the horses, securing them under the shack's small overhang where they had some protection from the driving rain. By the time she ducked back inside, soaked to the skin, the stove was glowing with warmth. Here, Owen said, handing her a blanket from his saddlebag. You should get out of those wet clothes before you catch your death. Hannah took the blanket gratefully. Turn around, she instructed, and he obliged without comment, facing the wall while she peeled off her sodden dress and petticoats, wrapping the blanket around herself like a shawl. She draped her clothing near the stove, hoping it would dry by morning. "You can look now," she said, settling on the floor near the stove's warmth. Owen turned, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of her in just the blanket, her damp hair falling loose around her shoulders. He quickly averted his gaze, removing his own wet coat and hanging it beside her dress. "Storm might last all night," he said, sitting across from her with the stove between them. "We'll continue at first light." Hannah nodded, drawing the blanket more tightly around herself. Despite the stove's heat, she shivered, as much from the tension in the small space as from the cold. "Thank you," she said after a while, "for trusting me with all this. You didn't have to." Owen looked up, his blue eyes reflecting the stove's glow. "You saved my life, Hannah, twice now if we're counting. Trust seems the least I can offer in return. It's not just that, though, is it?" She pressed, suddenly needing to understand the connection that had grown between them. "You could have left me in San Pedro, made your escape alone." He was silent for a long moment, his gaze steady on hers. "I could have," he finally acknowledged, "but I didn't want to." The simple honesty of his answer made her heart beat faster. "Why?" Owen seemed to struggle with his response, uncharacteristically uncertain. "Because in all my years of running, you're the first person who looked at me and saw something worth saving." He paused, his voice dropping lower. "And because the thought of never seeing you again was worse than any risk." Hannah's breath caught. Outside, thunder crashed, but neither of them moved, the air between them charged with something more powerful than the storm. "Owen," she began, but the words died in her throat as a new sound cut through the rain hoofbeats, approaching fast. They both froze, listening intently. At least 3 horses, maybe 4, coming directly toward the shack. "Caldwell's men," Owen whispered, reaching for his gun. "They must have picked up our trail in town." Hannah's mind raced. Her clothes were still wet and there was no time to dress. "What do we do?" Owen moved to the window, peering cautiously through the dirty glass. 4 riders, heavily armed, too many to fight and nowhere to run in this storm. He turned to her, his expression grim. "There's only one way out of this." Before she could ask what he meant, Owen was moving, gathering their belongings and shoving them under a loose floorboard he pried up with his knife. "Listen carefully," he said, his voice urgent but controlled. "I'm going to step outside, make them think I'm alone. When they take me, you stay hidden. Wait until morning, then take the evidence from the cave and go straight to Austin." "No," Hannah protested, clutching his arm. "They'll kill you." His hand covered hers, warm and steady. "Caldwell will want information first where the evidence is, who else knows? That buys time." He glanced toward the approaching riders, then back to her. "Hannah, this is bigger than me. If we don't stop Caldwell, he'll keep killing, keep corrupting everything he touches." The hoofbeats were almost upon them now. Owen cupped her face in his hands, his eyes intense. "Promise me you'll get to Austin." Hannah felt tears threatening but forced them back. "I promise," she whispered. And then he kissed her, a desperate, fierce kiss that contained all the words they hadn't said, all the time they might never have. Hannah clung to him, memorizing the feel of his lips, the strength of his arms around her, the scent of rain and leather and gunpowder that was uniquely him. When he pulled away, his expression had hardened into the mask of the gunslinger the world knew. "Stay down, stay quiet," he instructed, checking his revolver one last time. Then he was gone, stepping out into the storm to face Caldwell's men alone. Hannah crouched by the window, the blanket wrapped tightly around her, watching through a crack in the shutters. Owen stood in the rain, hands raised slightly as 4 riders circled him, guns drawn. "Kincaid," one of them called, a burly man with a thick beard. "Caldwell wants a word." "I bet he does," Owen replied, his voice carrying despite the rain. "Tell him I'm done running. Let's settle this, just him and me." The bearded man laughed. "That's not how this works. You're coming with us." Hannah could see Owen calculating, his posture tense but controlled. "And if I refuse?" In answer, one of the other riders fired a shot that kicked up mud inches from Owen's boot. "Next one takes your kneecap," the bearded man said. "Caldwell wants you alive, but he didn't specify in what condition." Owen slowly raised his hands higher. "All right, no need for that." They dismounted, two men keeping their guns trained on Owen while the bearded man approached to disarm him. The fourth rider remained on horseback, scanning the area. His gaze lingered on the shack, and Hannah shrank back from the window, heart pounding. "Check the shack, Peterson," the bearded man ordered. "Make sure he's alone." Hannah scrambled away from the window, looking desperately for a hiding place. The floorboard Owen had lifted was too small, and there was nowhere else in the one-room shack to conceal herself. The door creaked open and Peterson stepped inside, water streaming from his oilskin coat. Hannah stood frozen in the middle of the room, clutching the blanket around her, her wet hair falling over her shoulders. Peterson's eyes widened, then narrowed with interest. "Well, well," he drawled. "Kincaid's got himself a woman." Hannah lifted her chin, saying nothing. Peterson looked her up and down, taking in her state of undress beneath the blanket, and a slow smile spread across his face. "Hey, Jenkins," he called. "You're gonna want to see this." The bearded man, Jenkins, appeared in the doorway, dragging Owen with him. Owen's face was already bloodied, a cut above his eye dripping red into the rainwater soaking his shirt. When he saw Hannah standing there, naked but for the blanket, his expression contorted with rage and fear. "Leave her out of this," he growled. "She's just a woman I picked up in town. She doesn't know anything." Jenkins looked between Owen and Hannah, skepticism clear in his eyes. "That right, sweetheart. You just a working girl keeping him company." Hannah swallowed hard, understanding Owen's desperate attempt to protect her. If they believed she was just a prostitute he'd hired, they might let her go. If they suspected she knew about the evidence against Caldwell. "Yes," she said, forcing a defiant tone. "He paid for the night. Said we'd be back in town by morning." She allowed her blanket to slip slightly, revealing a bare shoulder. "If you gentlemen want to discuss business, maybe we could work something out." Peterson chuckled, but Jenkins wasn't so easily swayed. "What's your name, girl?" "Mary," Hannah lied. "Mary Wilson." Jenkins studied her face. "You look familiar." Hannah's heart skipped a beat. Had he seen her in San Pedro? Would he recognize her as the town nurse? Before Jenkins could pursue the thought, Owen lunged forward, despite the ropes binding his wrists. "Touch her and you're dead," he snarled. One of the other men struck him hard across the face with a revolver, sending Owen to his knees. Hannah bit back a cry, forcing herself to remain in character. "Protective of a whore, ain't he?" Jenkins remarked, his suspicion deepening. "Tie her up too. Caldwell can sort out who she is." As they bound her wrists, Hannah caught Owen's eye. His gaze held both an apology and a silent instruction. Play along, stay alive, wait for an opportunity. She gave an imperceptible nod. They were loaded onto horses, Hannah still wrapped in the blanket, her wet clothes left behind, and led away from the shack into the stormy night. The rain had lessened somewhat, but lightning still illuminated their path through the hills. They rode for hours, Hannah growing increasingly cold and uncomfortable, her wrists raw from the ropes. Owen rode ahead of her, his head bowed but his back straight, showing no weakness despite what must have been considerable pain from his reopened shoulder wound and fresh injuries. Just before dawn, they arrived at a sprawling ranch house surrounded by smaller buildings, bunkhouses, barns, storehouses. The Caldwell Ranch was one of the largest in the territory, its prosperity built on blood and corruption. They were taken into the main house, a grand structure that spoke of wealth and power. In a wood-paneled study, a man waited for them, standing before a roaring fire with a glass of whiskey in his hand. Victor Caldwell was in his 50s, broad-shouldered and imposing, with silver-streaked dark hair and cold, calculating eyes. "Owen Kincaid," he said, his voice cultured, almost pleasant. "How nice of you to finally accept my invitation." Owen, now on his knees with a guard's hand on each shoulder, raised his head. "Wasn't aware I had a choice, Caldwell." Caldwell's gaze shifted to Hannah, still clutching the blanket around her body, shivering with cold and fear. "And who might this be?" Jenkins pushed her forward. "Says she's a whore named Mary Wilson. Found her with Kincaid in a lined shack. But something don't add up." Caldwell approached Hannah, lifting her chin with one finger. She resisted the urge to flinch away from his touch. "Indeed," he murmured. "She doesn't have the look of a common prostitute." His eyes narrowed. "In fact, she looks remarkably like the nurse from San Pedro. Miss Fletcher, isn't it?" Hannah's blood ran cold, but she maintained her composure. "I don't know what you're talking about." Caldwell smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. "No." "Well, perhaps a night in my cellar will refresh your memory." He turned to his men. "Take Mr. Kincaid to the barn. I'll deal with him personally in the morning. Put the woman in the root cellar. No food, no water. We'll see how talkative she feels tomorrow." As they dragged Owen away, he struggled against his captors. "Caldwell," he shouted, "this is between you and me. Let her go." Caldwell watched with mild interest. "How touching. The gunslinger has a heart after all." He nodded to his men. "Take him." Hannah was led outside and across the yard to a small, sloped door set into the ground. The root cellar was damp and dark, with earthen walls and a dirt floor. They pushed her inside, locking the heavy door behind her. Alone in the darkness, Hannah finally allowed her tears to fall. She was cold, frightened, and utterly helpless. Owen was likely being tortured in the barn, and tomorrow, Caldwell would extract the information he wanted from one or both of them before killing them. But as the initial wave of despair passed, Hannah's practical nature reasserted itself. She wasn't dead yet, which meant there was still hope. She began to explore her prison, feeling her way around in the darkness. The cellar was small, perhaps 8 feet by 10, with shelves along one wall holding jars and root vegetables. The door was solid wood, secured from the outside. Hannah's hands, still bound at the wrists, found a broken jar on one of the shelves. Carefully, she maneuvered a shard of glass between her fingers and began sawing at the ropes. It was slow, painful work, the glass slipping and cutting her fingers several times, but eventually the ropes frayed enough for her to break free. With her hands unbound, she examined the door more carefully. The hinges were on the outside, but the wood around the lock was old and beginning to rot. If she had something to use as a lever. Hannah searched the shelves again, finding a metal garden trowel among the stored vegetables. It wasn't ideal, but it might work. She wedged the trowel into the gap near the lock and pushed with all her strength. The wood splintered slightly but held firm. She tried again, repositioning the trowel and putting her weight behind it. This time, she was rewarded with a louder crack as the wood began to give way. One more push, and the lock area splintered enough for her to reach through and manipulate the external latch. Heart pounding, Hannah eased the door open a fraction, peering out. It was fully dark now, the storm having passed, leaving a clear night sky dotted with stars. A lantern burned outside the main house, but the yard between the cellar and the barn was shrouded in shadows. Clutching the blanket tightly around her, Hannah slipped out of the cellar and pressed herself against the side of the nearest building. From here, she could see 2 guards outside the barn, smoking and talking in low voices. Getting past them would be nearly impossible. Then she noticed movement at the corner of the main house, a figure slipping out a side door, moving with purpose toward the barn. As the figure passed beneath the lantern, Hannah recognized the young woman as one of the house servants who had been present when they were brought in. She carried something in her arms, clothing, perhaps. Hannah watched as the woman approached the guards, speaking to them in a flirtatious manner. Whatever she said made them laugh, and one of them followed her around the side of the barn, presumably for a romantic encounter. The remaining guard turned his attention to rolling another cigarette. It was now or never. Hannah darted from shadow to shadow, making her way toward the back of the barn. There had to be another entrance, a window or smaller door that wouldn't be guarded. She found what she was looking for on the far side, a narrow window about 6 feet off the ground, likely used for ventilation. Standing on an upturned bucket, Hannah could just reach it. The opening was small, but she was slender, and determination lent her strength. Squeezing through the window was painful and undignified, the rough wood scraping her skin as she wriggled through the narrow space. She landed with a soft thud on a pile of hay inside, immediately crouching low and listening for any sound of alarm. The barn was dimly lit by a single lantern hanging from a center post. In the shadowy light, Hannah could make out stalls for horses, farming equipment, and her heart lurched. Owen, tied to a post in the center of the open area. His shirt had been removed, and his torso was marked with fresh bruises and small burns. His head hung forward, but she could see the slight rise and fall of his chest. He was alive. Moving silently, Hannah approached him, placing a gentle hand on his arm. Owen's head jerked up, his eyes wide with disbelief when he recognized her. "Hannah," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "How shh," she cautioned, already working on the ropes that bound him. "We don't have much time. Can you walk?" Owen nodded, wincing as the movement caused pain. The guard distracted, but not for long. The ropes fell away, and Hannah helped Owen to his feet. He swayed slightly but remained upright through sheer force of will. "We need horses," he murmured. "There's a small corral behind the barn," Hannah said, remembering what she'd seen during their arrival. "But we're surrounded by Caldwell's men. How do we get past them?" Owen's eyes, despite the pain clouding them, gleamed with determination. "We create a diversion." They found kerosene lamps hanging on hooks along the barn wall. Owen took one, removing the glass chimney. "We'll set fire to the hay storage at the far end," he explained. "When they rush to put it out, we'll take horses from the corral and head for the hills." It was dangerous, potentially deadly for any animals caught in the barn, but they had no other option. Owen positioned the lamp where it would ignite the hay bales quickly, but give them time to escape before the fire spread too far. "Ready?" he asked, and Hannah nodded, clutching the blanket more securely around herself. Owen struck a match and lit the lamp's wick, adjusting it to burn hot and bright. Then he knocked the lamp over, sending kerosene spilling onto the dry hay. The flames caught immediately, spreading with alarming speed. They fled through the back door of the barn, staying low and moving quickly toward the small corral where several horses were kept for daily ranch work. Already, shouts of alarm were rising from the direction of the main house as someone spotted the growing fire. Owen threw a bridle on the first horse. He reached a sturdy bay gelding, while Hannah managed to secure another for herself. There was no time for saddles. Owen helped Hannah mount before swinging up onto his own horse, grimacing with the effort. As chaos erupted around the burning barn, they rode hard for the hills, keeping to the shadows when possible. Behind them, the fire cast an orange glow against the night sky, illuminating the frantic figures of Caldwell's men as they formed a bucket line from the well to the barn. They rode without speaking, pushing the horses as much as they dared in the darkness. Owen led them on a circuitous route, doubling back several times to confuse any pursuit. By dawn, they had reached the foothills where the cave containing the evidence was located. "There," Owen said, pointing to a narrow opening in the rocky hillside, almost invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. "We'll rest the horses, then retrieve the documents." Inside, the cave was cool and dry, extending back about 30 feet before narrowing into impassable darkness. Ancient pictographs adorned the wall's handprints, animal figures, symbols whose meanings had been lost to time. Owen moved to a specific spot near the back, where a natural shelf had formed in the rock. Reaching up, he retrieved a small oilskin packet, carefully wrapped and sealed against moisture. "This is everything," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the confined space. "Records of bribes, witness statements, details of murders ordered by Caldwell, enough to hang him 10 times over." Hannah sat on a flat rock, suddenly overwhelmed by exhaustion and the events of the past day. "We still need to get to Austin," she said, "and Caldwell's men will be hunting us every step of the way." Owen knelt before her, taking her hands in his. Despite his injuries, his grip was warm and steady. "You've done more than enough, Hannah, more than I had any right to ask." "I can take the evidence to Austin alone." She shook her head firmly. "No, we started this together, we'll finish it together." Owen's expression softened, and he reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "You're the most extraordinary woman I've ever met, Hannah Fletcher." In the dim light filtering through the cave entrance, their eyes met and held. The tension that had been building between them since that first day in her clinic crystallized into something neither could deny any longer. Owen leaned forward slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. Instead, Hannah met him halfway, her lips finding his in a kiss that began gently but quickly deepened with shared desperation and dawning hope. When they finally separated, both breathing heavily, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "When this is over," he promised, "when Caldwell is behind bars, I want to show you that piece of land by the Colorado." Hannah smiled, her heart lighter than it had been in years despite their perilous situation. "I'd like that." They rested for several hours, taking turns keeping watch at the cave entrance. Hannah tended to Owen's injuries as best she could with limited supplies, grateful that none appeared life-threatening. The worst was his shoulder wound, which had indeed reopened during his captivity, but the bleeding had stopped, and there was no sign of infection. By midday, they were ready to continue their journey. The evidence was secured in Hannah's dress pocket. She had retrieved her clothes from the lined shack during their escape, and they were now dry if somewhat wrinkled. Their plan was to travel southeast, avoiding the main roads and settlements where Caldwell might have allies. The journey to Austin would take at least 3 days, possibly longer with their need for caution. They rode steadily, keeping to wooded areas and dry creek beds where their tracks would be harder to follow. By nightfall, they had put considerable distance between themselves and Caldwell's ranch, though they remained vigilant, taking turns sleeping while the other kept watch. On the second day, they reached a small trading post operated by an elderly couple who asked no questions about their obvious injuries or state of exhaustion. They were able to purchase proper supplies, food, ammunition for Owen's revolver, and a second blanket for Hannah. "Heard there was some excitement up at the Caldwell place," the old shopkeeper mentioned casually as he wrapped their purchases. "Barn burned down night before last. Talk is, 2 prisoners escaped during the confusion." Owen's expression remained neutral. "That's so. Anyone hurt?" The old man shrugged. "Couple of hands got singed putting out the fire. No serious injuries from what I hear." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Between you and me, couldn't have happened to a nicer fella. Caldwell's been squeezing out small ranchers for years. Man like that makes enemies." Hannah exchanged a glance with Owen, relieved that their desperate action hadn't resulted in any deaths. They left the trading post with renewed determination, pushing harder toward Austin. The landscape gradually changed, the rocky hills giving way to rolling grasslands with scattered stands of oak and mesquite. The weather held fair, which was both blessing and curse: easier travel, but less cover from potential pursuers. On the morning of the fourth day, they crested a hill to see Austin spread out before them in the valley below a growing city of perhaps 10,000 souls, with the dome of the state capitol rising proudly at its center. "We made it," Hannah breathed, hardly daring to believe it. Owen's face remained cautious. "We're not safe yet. Caldwell could have men here too." They approached the city cautiously, entering through a quiet residential area rather than the main road. The federal marshal's office was located near the Capitol, a solid stone building with the United States flag flying above the entrance. Owen hesitated outside, his hand instinctively checking the oilskin packet containing the evidence. "Hannah," he said quietly, "once we go in there, everything changes. The law will want statements, testimony. It could take weeks, maybe months before Caldwell faces trial." She understood his unspoken concern. "You're worried they might arrest you too?" He nodded grimly. "I've operated outside the law for years, even if it was in pursuit of justice. There's no guarantee they'll see it that way." Hannah took his hand, threading her fingers through his. "Then we'll face that together too, one step at a time." Marshal Clayton turned out to be a stern, silver-haired man with intelligent eyes and a reputation for incorruptibility. He listened to their story without interruption, examining the evidence with growing interest. "I've had suspicions about Caldwell for years," he admitted, "but never enough proof to move against him. This." He tapped the document spread across his desk. "This changes everything." "Will it be enough?" Owen asked. "Caldwell has friends in high places." Clayton's smile was grim. "Not as many as he thinks. The governor himself has been looking for a way to break Caldwell's grip on the territory." He studied Owen thoughtfully. "As for your situation, Kincaid, the law gives some latitude to those who help bring criminals to justice. I can't promise there won't be consequences for your past actions, but I'll speak on your behalf." It was more than they had dared hope for. Clayton moved quickly, dispatching riders to San Pedro to retrieve Tommy and sending a telegram to the U.S. Marshal's office in El Paso to investigate the false murder charges. By nightfall, the wheels of justice were turning against Victor Caldwell. Hannah and Owen were provided rooms at a respectable boarding house under the protection of Clayton's deputies. For the first time in years, in Owen's case they could sleep without one eye open, knowing they were safe. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of depositions, statements, and legal proceedings. True to his word, Marshal Clayton advocated for Owen, emphasizing his crucial role in bringing Caldwell to justice. The false murder charges were dismissed when the El Paso sheriff, facing charges himself, confessed to accepting bribes. Caldwell was arrested at his ranch, along with several of his men. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and as Clayton had predicted, many of his so-called friends quickly distanced themselves once his crimes were exposed. Through it all, Hannah remained by Owen's side, her quiet strength a constant he had come to rely upon. They rarely spoke of the future, both afraid to tempt fate while Caldwell's case was still proceeding. But in stolen moments, a touch of hands under the table during a meeting, a shared glance across a crowded room, a brief kiss in the shadow of the boarding house stairwell, the promise of what might be sustained them. 1 month after their arrival in Austin, with Caldwell awaiting trial in the federal prison and Owen officially cleared of all charges, they found themselves standing on the banks of the Colorado River, looking out over the land Owen had described in the cave. It was everything he had promised: a gentle slope leading down to the river, with good water access and rich grassland ideal for raising horses. The previous owner had built a small cabin near a stand of pecan trees, basic but sound, with room to expand. "What do you think?" Owen asked, watching Hannah's face anxiously as she took it all in. She turned to him, her eyes bright with emotion. "It's perfect." Owen took her hands in his expression more serious than she had ever seen it. "I know it's not much compared to what you had in San Pedro. The cabin needs work, and we'd be miles from the nearest town." Hannah silenced him with a finger to his lips. "Owen, I don't care about any of that. The past months have shown me what matters, and it's not a comfortable house or a thriving practice." She smiled up at him, her heart full. "It's having someone to build a life with, someone to trust, someone who sees me for who I truly am." Owen's eyes, those startlingly blue eyes that had captured her attention from the very beginning, shone with a vulnerability he rarely allowed the world to see. "I love you, Hannah. I think I've loved you since you found me lying face down in the dust and refused to let me give up." "I love you too," she whispered, the words feeling both momentous and utterly natural. "And I want nothing more than to build this life with you." He kissed her then, beneath the wide Texas sky, with the river flowing steadily beside them, a kiss that held all the promise of their shared future. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in the nearest town, with Tommy, fully recovered and working as Marshal Clayton's assistant, standing as witness. Hannah wore a new dress of pale blue, and Owen a proper suit that made him look both handsome and slightly uncomfortable. Though his discomfort vanished the moment Hannah walked toward him down the short aisle. Their life together began in that small cabin by the river. True to his word, Owen started building a horse breeding operation, beginning with 2 quality mares, and a stallion purchased with the reward money from Caldwell's arrest. Hannah established a small medical practice, riding out to neighboring ranches and settlements when needed, quickly earning respect for her skills and compassion. The cabin grew as they did, room by room, built by Owen's hands with help from neighbors during occasional barn-raising style gatherings. The once simple structure became a proper home, still modest but comfortable, with a wide porch where they often sat in the evenings, watching the sunset paint the river gold. Victor Caldwell's trial came and went, ending with a conviction that ensured he would spend the rest of his life in prison. With his power broken, the region began to heal, small ranchers returning to land they had abandoned under his threats, honest lawmen replacing those he had corrupted. 1 year after their wedding, Hannah gave birth to their first child, a son they named Thomas, after the young cowhand whose courage had helped bring Caldwell to justice. 2 years later came a daughter, Elizabeth, with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined spirit. On the 5th anniversary of the day Hannah had found Owen lying in the dust of San Pedro's Main Street, they sat on their porch watching their children play in the yard. The horse farm had prospered, with Owen's breeding stock now sought after throughout the territory. Hannah's medical practice had grown as well, and she was training a young woman from a neighboring ranch to assist her. "You ever miss it?" Owen asked, his hand finding hers as it often did. "The excitement, the town," Hannah smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Not for a moment. This is where I belong." She looked out over their land, the sturdy barn, the corral where young horses frolicked, the garden that supplied their table, the river flowing steadily beyond. "This is what I was looking for all along," even when I didn't know it. Owen pressed a kiss to her temple. When you said I wasn't done, just down. You were right about more than you knew. You gave me a life I never thought I'd have. We gave it to each other, Hannah corrected gently. And we're just beginning. As the sun set over the Colorado River, casting long shadows across the land that had become their home, Hannah Fletcher Kincaid knew with absolute certainty that she had found not just a place to belong, but a love that would sustain them through whatever the future might bring, a love born in the dust of a frontier town and forged in the fires of adversity, stronger and more enduring than either of them could have imagined on that fateful day when their paths first crossed.